Hey friends, hope you guys are doing well. This is the part 1 of Guide to Lose Watercolor Flowers. This is the kind of technique that I used to teach, but I no longer do that. So basically, you are gonna have an experience how it is like to sit in my class, course, and the teaching method. If you're a beginner and you want to start with watercolor flowers, this is a gold mine for you, and you can jump to any specific part of the video and you can learn about that thing. But I would really recommend you to go in a systematic way that I have curated this video in. And without wasting any time, let's get into the video right now. I'm gonna start off this video with teaching all the basic watercolor techniques that I'm gonna use in this style of painting flowers. I'm not gonna go through all the basic techniques because that's just gonna confuse you a little bit more. So I'm just gonna start with something that we are actually gonna use. I'm gonna tilt the paper a little bit because that's a little bit more comfortable for me. So the first watercolor technique is wet and dry technique. When we are doing wet and dry technique, when we are putting wet paint on dry surface, then it's called wet and dry technique. So paint can always be applied in wet way. So when I'm putting a wet paint on dry piece of paper or dry surface, it's called wet and dry technique. When we use this technique is when we need harsh edges or hard, or when I need to do detailing. And when I do detailing, when I need a little bit of more control. So in this technique, like paint is just not moving here and there. I am having like really rigid edges. So here you can see, you can get harsh, rigid, hard. This is called hard edge. So when I need hard edge, when I have to do detailing, or when I need a little bit of more control, that's when I do wet and dry technique. The second technique is wet and wet technique. So this is very similar to wet and dry technique, but in the difference is when you are putting wet paint on wet surface. So I'm just gonna normally wet the surface. I don't know if you can see. So here you can see the paper is wet, the paper is shining where it is wet. So I'm gonna put wet paint on wet surface. It's called wet and wet technique. And when I do wet and wet technique is when I need very soft edges, or when I have to do base layer, or when I just want the colors to mix or something. So here you can see the edges are very soft. They are not as hard as wet and dry technique. So that's what you get in wet and wet technique, very soft edges. And when I have to do base layers, I mostly go with wet and wet technique. The third technique that I use a lot, I use this technique a lot of the time, and it's dry brush technique. If you've been following my videos from the longest time, you can see in my watercolor painting or floral painting, I use a lot of dry brush technique. Why I use dry brush technique is to add a lot of interest and contrast in your painting. Mostly whenever I am painting the green elements, I use a lot of I use a lot of dry brush technique. So here you can see, this is the kind of technique, this is called the dry brush technique. And here you can see a very rugged, but also at the same time I can use it whenever I need to add a lot of interest in my painting, a lot of noise, and you know, like something that I do not want to put a lot of effort, I do not want to do a lot of detailing, but still I need a little bit of attraction towards that specific side, then I can use dry brush technique. And the fourth technique that I am gonna do is gonna be right over here. I have already painted a swatch for this, and it's gonna be layering. So layering is the fourth technique that I use, and that we are practically going to use in this style of painting. And what is layering? When we are layering one swatch over another swatch. So I'm just gonna layer it just like this. Few things to notice when you're doing layering. The base layer that you painted, it should be dry. It can be wet and wet technique, and then you can just let it dry, and then you put your second layer, and then you can see the common area. I'm just gonna mark it like this. So this is the common area of painting. So it is more saturated than this swatch which we painted and this swatch which we painted. So the layered area is darker. When we have to add more saturation, then we do layering. Supposingly I painted something with the base layer and then I need a little bit of darkness at a specific area, I will just layer with another swatch or something, and then I will let it dry, and then I will see if I need more darkness or saturation. I can just layer over that specific thing again. That will just add more depth, more saturation, and that's where I use layering. And we are going to use a lot of layering in this technique. We're also going to use a lot of wet and dry technique. We are not necessarily going to use a lot of this, but I'm going to use a little bit of it when we are going to paint leaves, and way less wet and wet. We are also going to use that. I'm going to show the whole sheet, so if in case someone want to screenshot it, so they can do that. And now we are going to move to all the art supplies that I recommend, that I use for this specific technique. So starting with the color, this is my studio palette, which mostly contains Winsor & Newton professional grade watercolors. Main colors, like they are only like 18 colors, maybe 17, I don't exactly remember, but these are all the colors that I use, and you can find the whole palette in the description below. You can find the link. And for the paper, I'm gonna use this 100% cotton watercolor paper, which is an amazing paper. I absolutely love this paper. It's a little bit textured, 100% cotton, 270 GSM, and this is the exact same paper that is used in my sketchbook, which is this one, where I paint a lot of amazing paintings. So you can also find the link of these sketchbooks in the description below. These are my own sketchbook, and you can find the link in the below. And the biggest question should be, which brush should you use? Because this is a very specific technique that needs a specific kind of brush, if I'm not wrong. So I'm gonna do a little bit of eye training, what kind of brush you should have, and then we are also going to talk about which kind of brushes you should not use. So I'm just going to separate the brushes that you should use. You can start with one of my favorite brush to do this technique with is Silver Black Velvet, and the size 8. This is the brush that I recommend all my students. Like if you are gonna go, you have started your watercolor journey and you have to start with a good brush, this is gonna help you so much with all the flowers. Even if you want to paint the landscape, seascapes, this is a perfect brush to begin with. Amazing brush this is, and size 8 is universal. So good. The other brush that is very nice, it is the mop brush. So the mop brushes can be from multiple brands. So I'm having few of the brands here. So the Raphael 2x0 brush, the size, this is the Raphael, the size is 2/0. It is an amazing brush. I have used it a lot. This specific brush I haven't used, I have kept it new, but I absolutely love this brush, and it have a really amazing point. So I'm just gonna show it to you. So here you can see amazing point that you can get out of this brush. Also, the next brush is again a mop brush, Da Vinci, and again the size 0. It will work amazing, it will do wonders. Amazing brush. The brush that I have used a lot, and one of the brush that I have used a lot, it is this one. It is from Zytang, ZYTANG. It's a Chinese brand, but the brush is absolutely amazing. I will just tell you why. So here you can see the point is just so much better than any of the brush that I have shown you. Amazing brush, amazing point. But of course, if you are not able to find it, that's fine too. And if you do not want to go with let's say mop brush or that brushes, we still have few of them, other brushes. So this is one brush that you can also use. It's Silver Renaissance, size 8. I love this brush. I have talked about this brush a lot of the time. It is made up of pure red sable, and it's an amazing brush with amazing point. Really love this brush. And the other brush is this one, Rosemary Co Pure Squirrel Series 42. Again, an amazing brush, but I will recommend you to go with a size 8 or 6 because the size 10 is really big for this technique. Bigger the size, more hard it will be for you to handle. Size 8 will work perfectly, and size 6 if you want to paint a little bit smaller. And then if you do not want to go with natural hair brushes, the previous brushes that I showed, all the brushes were natural hair. This is squirrel hair. Raphael, the Da Vinci, it's also squirrel hair. The Zytang, it is also squirrel. It is also squirrel. The only brush here, it is the Silver Black Velvet. It's a blend of natural and synthetic squirrel. So you can also use this one. It is an amazing brush. Will always recommend this brush. And this is a pure red sable, and again this is a squirrel hairbrush, which is the rosemary and co. If you do not want to use a natural hairbrush, you can go with Princeton Neptune, and it's an imitation of squirrel hairbrush. Amazing brush, can get a good point if you're starting with this brush. Size 8 will work perfectly for this technique. But also I have realized this one thing, that with time you will lose the point very easily as compared to the other brands. So if you're investing in a brush, it should be like a long-term investment. So get a brush that will go like really good for the long term. And the other brush, if you do not want to go with a synthetic, a natural hairbrush, is Princeton Heritage, and I will again recommend you a size 8 or 10 in this one, because synthetic hair will spread a little bit less as compared to the natural one. They will also absorb a little bit less water as compared to the natural ones. So you can go with these two brushes. Throughout the whole tutorial, I will try to use different kind of brushes so that you do not feel this kind of thing that you have to stick with one specific brush. You can go with any brush, honestly. Mostly all the round brushes works perfectly. The mop brushes work amazing. The squirrel hair will work amazing. Most of them, not sure about all. And the other question that should be arising in your mind is which kind of brushes you should not use for this technique. So I will definitely say a big no to Winsor & Newton squirrel hairbrush, because I have realized this one thing, that this brush is very, very, very soft. And if you're doing this, it is just very soft brush. It just doesn't work with this kind of technique. So it is an amazing brush. I will absolutely love this brush for the washes. I have a bigger size which I use for washes, but not for florals, not the best one. And the other kind of brushes that you have to avoid are the brushes that are very long. They're like, so here, this is not a normal round. I'm gonna have a size 10 from different brands. So you can see this is having a really long point. So this brush won't be working for this specific technique, because just brush will work very, very weird. Let me try if I can put a stroke. So it just won't work. It will not work very nicely. By the way, this brush is really good for detailing. I really love this brush for detailing. And the same goes for the other brush. I am also having this brush, Velvet Touch long round. Haven't used it in the longest time, honestly, but also this brush won't work very nicely with this technique. But again, an amazing brush for really good detailing. Throughout the whole tutorial, I will try to keep a layout like this, where you can see the palette, what is happening in my palette, what I am doing in my palette. The paper is gonna be here. Also, I'm just gonna use these kind of brushes. So these brushes I will try to jump back and forth, so that again it makes you a little bit more comfortable, that you don't have to stick with one brush. So yeah, I'm just gonna start with the first flower. The first flower that we are gonna start with is a rose. It is one of the most favorite flower that we people like to paint, and we are gonna start with that flower. The basic technique that we have to follow in this flower is a C stroke. And before that, I just want to share a little bit more. So I really want you to have a control over this one thing, where you just start from a point and then you're having a little bit of thickness, and you just have to smoothly go back to a point. So here what I want you to do is, you're starting from a point, right? And then you're having a very smooth transition, and then you're having a thickness like this. The thickness should be most at the center part, and again back, you have to go back to a really nice point. This is the one thing that you have to remember throughout the whole thing. You will be using this thing in roses, petal flowers, leaves, and like so many things. So keep this up. And also the thing is, you should have a very smooth transition. The thinnest part it should be at the outer side, and the most thickness in this stroke should stand in the center part. I see a lot of students, they are just starting from a point. I'll just try to hold my brush from the back side, but also while you're putting, you should have a really good angle. Let's say 80-degree angle at your brush. So what students do a lot of the time, they will just abruptly have a really thick point, and then they'll just get out of this. I'm just not able to get what students do, but here you can see it's start and then it get thick like this. You're having thickness and then you're going back down. The brush was really good, it helped me, but people are just not able to do a smooth transition. So do a little bit of practice, but also while you're doing practice, I do not want you to be filling a lot of pages. I just want you to be very mindful before you're putting every stroke, while you're putting pressure, while you're releasing pressure, that what you have to do while you're putting that stroke, that should be already running in your mind. All right, so this is one of the basic technique, and the basic stroke that you have to use is a C stroke. So you're gonna use exact same pressure idea, but in a curved way, just like this. Now I'm gonna do a little bit of eye training for this C stroke. So here you're having a very nice sharp point. You're also having a very nice sharp point at both the sides. You're having the most thickness in the center. You're having a smooth transition from thin to thick, thick to thin at both sides, right? But also at the same part, the C stroke should not be the C. It should be a section of C. So if I'm talking about the letter C, it should be like this, but I do not want you guys to be doing something like this. I want you to paint this stroke as a part of a C letter. So it's just basically starting, having pressure, releasing pressure, and then this should be the letter C. This should be a part of letter C. It should not be exactly a letter C. I really want you guys to be very mindful of this thing, because this thing will lead to the arching effect, and I will tell you what is exactly arching effect. And that's something that we have to avoid whenever we are painting a rose flower. For now, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start with painting the rose flower. And I'm gonna take a little bit of saturated color, but also here you can see it's not very saturated that I'm having a very hard time moving it in the palette. You can see I can easily move, but also I'm having saturation. If you're not able to achieve a good saturation, that means your watercolors are a little bit more chalky and you can invest a little bit in a good paints. And here you can see I'm having a saturated paint and I have loaded my brush with this. Now beginning of a rose flower is from the center. So I put something like this. It's not exactly a comma or something, but I just put pressure and I just release the pressure. I get something like this. I see a lot of students, they do something like this. Do not do that. It's a very wrong approach. So if you're starting with the rose, do that. And now I have to paint the C strokes, but the C stroke has to be painted in a smaller size right now. So I'm painting C strokes just like this. Can you see the size is very small? The size is getting a little bit bigger and little bit bigger. I'm also having a mixture of bigger size and smaller size C strokes. And then again, I'm gonna have a C stroke. I'm gonna take a little bit of more water and a little bit of more color because I want the saturation. And again, the C stroke happening, the C stroke happening, C stroke happening. So here you can see the size gets smaller and then it gets bigger, then it's get a little bit more bigger, then a little bit of more bigger. So we have to move from smaller size, a little bit bigger size, a little bit more bigger size, a little bit of more bigger size. So we should also have a combination of smaller size and bigger size C strokes. Once I have painted this much of the thing, I am gonna water down the paint. So here you can see in my palette. Also one thing, I really want you guys to use the mixing area of your palette. If you're having the mixing area, use it. If you're having a napkin, use it. So once I'm done with that, I'm just gonna paint. I'm gonna water down it a little bit more. So I'm just gonna paint exact same C strokes. Again, mixture of bigger ones, smaller ones. And here I'm intentionally allowing the color to bleed with within each other. The C strokes, the color should bleed. So this is how you can achieve a really nice rose. Few things that you have to notice once you're done with this layer is, again, you're having a mixture of smaller and the bigger size C strokes. You have to move from smaller to the bigger size, and then also the strokes are having connection with each other. So here you can see, starting with the center stroke, you're having connection with this stroke. You're having a lot of connection just running throughout. All the strokes are connected with each other. But also one thing that you have to notice is that you are also having a lot of negative space. So what is negative space? That white space that you can see in this flower is the negative space, and you need to have negative space in order to make the whole composition very interesting. The idea of using a dry brush technique as an element of interest is because you can see a lot of white and colored thing. Again, you should be able to see a lot of white and colored element that will add so much interest in your painting, and that will just make it so much better. And once it has dried, I'm not sure if the paper has dried, but I'm just gonna use exact same color. I'm using permanent rose. I do not exactly remember which color it is, but it is PV19 from Da Vinci. But again, it's just a pink color, so you can use any. So I'm using a very saturated shade of pink color, and I'm just putting few strokes. You should allow the paper to dry, but I'm just gonna move on to this layer. Not a lot, very less amount of strokes, honestly. If you have to do detailing, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 strokes are very good, but they should be well distributed throughout the area of the flower. It should not be like all the 7 strokes should be present at this side, all the 7 strokes should be present at this side. They should be well sprinkled, and everything just should be well sprinkled in the whole flower. Another thing that I really want your notice on is that the overall structure of your flower should be a circle. It should be a circle. It should not be an oval. It should not be a crooked circle, just like this. The overall structure should be a circle, but also at the same time, you need to have these bumps happening. So can you see these bumps? I really want you guys to have these bumps. So these are just few things that you notice while you are painting a rose flower. It can be little too much for the first run, but I really want you to remember all these things before you are painting, so that they are stuck in your mind while you are painting, and you should remember, oh, at this part I have to act like this, or at this part you should act like that. Now I'm going to talk about few things that you have not to do while you are painting a rose flower. So here are the few things that you should not. While you are painting the C strokes, again, do not put a stroke that you are starting from the center. This is the stroke that you should be starting from the center. It should not be like this big, because once you are having this stroke, it will be very hard for you to rotate around, because now it's giving a structure like this. Now you have to rotate in this oval shape, and that's something that we not have to do, because we have to avoid that oval shape. So if you want the whole strokes to revolve around this flower in a circular shape, make it more like a circular instead of more like an ovalish, right? But also it should not be a dot, a circle dot. Please don't do that. At least have a little bit of interest in that stroke. The other thing that you not have to do is, okay, so you started with the flower. Few people that I have seen, they will arch the strokes onto the other strokes that they have already painted. So this is called the arching effect, which I absolutely hate, because it doesn't give any effect of rose, and a lot of people will do that. I do not want you to be painting the strokes that are arching up upon each other. Rather, you want to paint the strokes that they are hugging each other. So can you see this stroke is basically kind of hugging the previous strokes with both of his hands and both of its sharp edges. So can you see all the strokes are basically just hugging each other. All the strokes, they should hug each other, not arch each other. These are the things that you have to take a very detailed note on. And there is one more thing that you have to take care of, is that you do not have to paint a stroke that is just hugging the whole flower. I'm just gonna tell you, so I'm just gonna start from the center. Okay, so you started from the center, and then you are painting the C strokes that is just hugging the whole circumference of the previous stroke. Rather, try to make strokes a little bit more smaller than what I just showed. So can you see, it should be natural, it should be a section of C stroke, it should not be a C stroke. So where the strokes end, I'm not gonna start exactly from there, maybe a little bit covering, hugging the previous stroke, but also not having the whole circumference of the previous stroke to be covered. And also have a little bit good amount of negative space, that now you know that you have to do second layer and you have to mix all the strokes. So you have to keep that negative space a little bit valid, and in a way that you can put strokes that can mix the previous strokes. The second kind of flower that we are going to learn is a petal flower. What is a petal flower? If you have seen a daisy flower, sunflower, or those kind of flowers in which you are having a center and multiple petals just poking out, it is called a petal flower. And now we are going to paint that. And for that, you don't have a very specific stroke, you just need to achieve a specific shape. So you can just do that with the multiple means. So what I do for painting a single petal, I just start with the brush, I just put a lot of pressure, and then I just come back to a point. I can just rinse out all the color, and I can just come back and I can just reshape the petal. So this is a specific shape that you need to achieve when you are painting a petal. But also at the same time, if you can achieve these kind of edges over here, it adds a lot of interest, it looks really good, and it's a plus point. Again, if you're having these smaller strokes, it's gonna add like such a good interest in your painting. So I'm just gonna start with painting a flower, and for that what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna paint an imaginary circle. So you just have to imagine a circle which is gonna be here. I'm right now putting like these dots so that it can help you to visualize. So I'm just gonna start with a petal. So you can see I'm having those tootsie edges, and I am gonna rinse out all the color from a brush that I did and came back. So can you see a really nice strokes? And I'm just gonna put these kind of strokes. So I'm achieving the same strokes, but what the second time what I did, I started from the bottom, I went to the top, and I again went to the bottom. So I just need the shape. I can go with any approach, but also it should look like both the leaves, both the petals are from same flower. They should not look like they are from different species. And the other thing, again, I'm gonna use the side of the brush to have that kind of effect, the kind of shape. You can go from bottom, you can go back and reshape it. And I'll be needing more of the color. So can you see? There is one thing common in, like few things common in the whole, all the petals. You're having very tootsie edges where they are connected to a center area. And also you're having negative painting, negative areas. Can you see here? It adds a lot of interest. All of the petals, they're not having very perfect round edges. Looks very good, looks very decent, but also it should not be like a lot of like, if you're doing something like this, which I'm gonna represent right now. So if you're gonna add like something like this at the top, it's not gonna look good. It kind of looks like the flower should be connected from this part. So it should be a little bit decent, but also it can have a little bit of imperfection, because that adds just a lot of interest in your painting. And also make sure that you're not very dark at this area, because I'll tell you, you have to do a second layer, and this is the area where we will be doing the layering part. But the next step of this flower is I'm gonna pick sap green color, I'm gonna use the mixing area and I'm just gonna paint these strokes. If they are blending, bleeding, completely fine, let it bleed. Also, I do not like to paint a little more than that, because if the center area is defined, my job is done. I do not like to add a brown thing over here because it just doesn't look pretty. And if you have to do that, that's the thing that I do with gouache flowers. I add white dots, but here I am doing watercolors, so I'm not gonna do that. So I'm just gonna leave it here and I will let it dry, and then I will get back to this flower. But in the meantime, I'm gonna do a little bit of eye training, and this is one of my most important thing, that I love to do eye trainings and I love to ask my students to do eye training also. I'm just gonna do this one thing in the eye training. So here I'm having a center part. These are the things that you have to take care of. If you're starting a flower from here, all right, and if you're painting, again, you have petal like this and a petal like this. So I have just did something. So if you're putting an X's throughout the center of a petal, it should cross the center of the center point that you drew, right? I'm just gonna draw an imaginary line throughout the axis of this petal, and it's not passing through the center of the circle that you drew. And again, same with this thing, it's not going that way. So what I want, if you are painting all the petals, the center, the axis of all the petals should be passing through the center of the circular area, like this. Now if I'm just pulling a line throughout the center of all the petals, they all will be joining over here, and that's your aim should be. Also, if you are painting a flower like this, the length from the top to the bottom, it should be equal in all the petals. It should not be varying like crazy. It can vary a little bit too, like it can be 21, 22, it can be like a little bit of difference, a point distance. It can vary, but it should not vary a lot that you can see that with naked, like very easily without even putting a lot of effort on your eye. Try not to do that. Make sure the length of all the petals are very same. So this paper has still haven't dried, but I'm just gonna move on, let the paper dry, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of red in this orange color to make it a little bit more darker and obvious. And then I'm just gonna paint like few strokes, like can you see, like very few strokes. You don't have to overlay the whole petal, just like this. Actually I should let this flower dry, but you get the idea. So you can do wet and wet technique here. I kind of did a wet and wet technique, but I will also do the same thing once the flower has dried. In the meantime, this flower is drying. I'm just gonna show you one more thing. So I'm again gonna use the color that I'm having in my palette. So I'm just gonna draw an imaginary circle just like this. So you can vary the thickness of the petals. So supposingly I do not want a lot of thick petals, so I'm just gonna paint multiple of these thinner petals. You can go from out to in to out, just like this. You can vary this thing. So I'm painting exact same flowers, but this time what I did, I just reduced the thickness of the petal, each petal, and that is just creating a whole new kind of flower. This is more like a daisy flower. Also, the other thing that you can do, other thing that you can experiment with is the length of the petals. So I can just reduce the length of petals and I can get again a new kind of flower. So you can just play around with multiple things so that you can get a different kind of result. But again, here you can see the length of each petal is same. All the petals are crossing from the center and they are not just very crooked Also, these kind of things you just have to take note of. Also, you can see I am having very rugged effect, very tootsie effect over here. It just adds a lot of interest. And now I will just let this flower dry, and then we can do a little bit of detailing. Once the paper has dried, I'm gonna take, so there is this one thing that I have learned with experience. If you want to check if the flower has dried, put your palm onto the paper that you painted upon. If it feels cool, it is still wet. If it feels normal, then it's dry. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna paint over just like this. So I'm not painting on to the whole petal, just a specific area. And here we go, and I'm done with the detailing. Maybe at some parts what you can do is you can just smoothen up the edges with a clean brush with clean water. So here I kind of smoothened it up, and if I want to detail this kind of flower, probably I will just go and I will just put few strokes in the whole flower in the same fashion that I painted the previous layer. I need a little bit of more saturation with a little bit of more orange. So maybe I can do detailing like this if I have to do a detailing. So the whole idea is just to have a really good amount of depth. So you don't have to be very specific. Just think about the ways that you can add depth to your flower just by adding shadows, adding saturation, adding the size, shape, the dry brush technique. So many things to do, and you can add like so many things in your painting. So the flowers that we just learned right now, those were the kind of flowers that I used to create a whole frame of the composition. I will tell you what that means when we will be painting the whole composition, maybe next video. But these are the kind of flowers that I use to create a framework in my composition, and now I'm gonna work on things that will be more like a filler things or filler flowers. So for painting the filler flowers, I'm just going to use this blue color, which is really pretty. I absolutely love this. Is Cobalt Blue Deep, and for that the basic stroke is this one. So it doesn't have to be a specific petal. It is just something that I painted with the side of a brush, and then I am having a really nice tip at the bottom. So this is the basic technique that you have to use for this kind of flower. And again, I'm just gonna start from the base like this. I'm gonna paint multiple of them. You can also paint it like this, and maybe this. You can use the natural shape of the brush. So here the whole idea is I am leaving a lot of white space in between, so that now I can paint with a clean water, and I can have this effect of very soft and like subtle stem-ish part. So can you see? So basically it's an elongated flower that contains multiple colored petals. Also kind of they're connected to each other with these watery strokes, so that color is just bleeding into it. And now I'm just gonna take this green color. So here I'm just picking the color and mixing it in the mixing area. I'm just gonna start from the bottom, and I'm gonna use the tip of the brush. If the color is going in that part, it's completely fine. And also I can add like these few smaller size leaves. Just add such a good interest in your painting. The other thing that you have to avoid, this is kind of funny, it made me laugh. People will just paint something like this, which is just too elongated, not having a lot of width. I mean, do not paint something this elongated. Make it a little bit more fuller, a little bit thicker, lots and lots of small stems, kind of mixed with each other. Of course you can do detailing after that, but I really do not feel that I need to do detail because it itself look very pretty. So I will just stop till here. Maybe you can do a little bit of blue detailing if you want to, but I'm definitely not going to do that. And then you can also paint the filler flowers in a way that they are just again petal flowers but they are smaller ones, but you can be like less precise in these ones. So I should paint it in a way that they are like less precise or something. So can you see it's less precise, and I can take the green color, just putting the stroke, not a lot of attention that these flowers should be having, like, and you're done with few filler flowers. And the last thing that you have to do is the green elements. So for painting the green element, what are the green elements? Stems, leaves, these are all the part of green elements. For painting the leaf, again we have to remember the first stroke that we learned, with very less pressure, getting pressure, releasing pressure. So this was the first stroke that we learned, having a gradual transition from thin, thick, thin. I am just gonna do exact same thing, starting from the tip, having a lot of pressure, releasing the pressure. I'm gonna have exact same strokes on the other side, and I have a leaf. So I just painted one stroke like this, two stroke like this, and I just filled it up. So this is how you can get a really nice pretty leaf. So I'm gonna have a stem, and I'm gonna have another one which is gonna be like this. So can you see how pretty it is? But the other thing that you absolutely have to avoid is to have a very wonky shape of a leaf. So I do not want people to be having a very wonky shape of a leaf, which is this one. I mean, it should have a decent point, it should have a decent thickness, and again back to a decent point with a good amount of thickness. Here it's like too wonky, too sharp, and too plastic. That's something that I avoid. The whole composition, the whole flowers and whole everything, it should have some level of decency, but also having a little bit of edginess around that can be sprinkled all over the composition. So this is the kind of leaves that you paint, that you need to practice before you are putting onto the composition. And one other kind of leaf that I absolutely love, and I'm just gonna paint it right over here. So that leaf is just like, so that leaf is starting from a point and releasing to a point, starting from a point, releasing to a point. Just like this, I'm gonna release all so the whole idea of this stroke is not having multiple strokes, just starting from a point and releasing to a point. It is a very thin kind of leaf, and with watery stroke you can just come back with more strokes and join them just like this. So this can be used as a filler element. This can also be used as a stroke. You can also use the exact same thing in a way that you're just putting two strokes. Maybe I do not want to add a lot of weight at that specific area, but also I need something, so I will just paint one stroke, two strokes, just like this. And we are done with all the green elements. Probably we will be painting the whole composition in next video, so stay tuned. This is the part 1 of Guide to Loose Florals.